didn't seem like we were picking it up a little better here or something going down.
Can you shut the door, Rick?
Sure.
Thank you, sir. By the way, chili, lime, and pork rinds was a wrong move. I ate the first one. I'm like, the rest of the bag's mine. I'm going to eat the rest of the bag. That's all there is to this. I'm hungry. I'm trying to eat better.
It shows.
So these are actually,
They're supposed
there
to.
are no calories in
Yes.
this. These are kind of carb free,
Yes.
and they actually have flavor.
Do they have a lot of salt?
No,
Okay.
they do not. Not a lot of sodium.
Do they have any nutritional value?
Other than just providing sustenance, no.
No.
Providing
Something to
sustenance.
crunch on.
In bulk?
I was hungry, and I'm not going to be eating sausage until I get home. So pork rinds it was.
Those are pork rinds?
Those are pork rinds.
Big belly.
That's right.
Big guns.
All right, I'm going to pray, and we're going to get started. Let me do this view. View slideshow. Hey, there we go. All right, Father. Whoa, we love you and we praise you. We thank you for bringing us here in joy, and even when we're not feeling so great and we're not feeling on our game all the time. These times actually do rejuvenate us and bring us joy and bring us a greater sense of peace, and that's what I've been looking forward to all day. And regardless of what happened in the last hour, you're still God and I'm not. And we just praise you, send your spirit on us and guide us in this discussion. In your son's name, amen. All right, well, we're back. We're going to take, just as a reminder, we're going to take down the, my wife, we're going to take down the table when we're done here. So I'm going to erase it now. So if I forget, it's because I erased it.
So taking tables down?
How do they have an open house at our facility? Usually when you have an open house, it's at your own facility.
Right.
Yeah, it's a fundraiser. They're doing their fundraiser stuff through us. So it's what we do to support their ministry. And provide them a place kind of on this side of town, because a lot of their stuff happens on the other side of town. Interesting about Prescott is the other side of town is very difficult to do things in. There's not a lot of spaces to meet as a group, as a thing. I mean, outside of Prescott Resort, which is exorbitant in terms of what they charge. But so all of the kind of places to do things and have gatherings and so forth that are, I guess, affordable for a lot of the ministries are on this side of town. Because you go to Prescott, man, my dad ran into it. He had a hard time finding space to meet for the church that he had over there, because he had a church over at Prescott. And finding a place for a church was next to impossible, and still is. I mean, if you want to start a church, you're going to have to. That's why everybody kind of starts churches over here, mainly because they can have a place to meet versus over there. So interesting on that front. All right. I'm going to start it anyway. I'm going to ask the question.
Answers Jesus.
Why do we do Good answer. That worked. Why? Yeah, that question is why. Why do we do this? Why do we do this?
Where do you do what?
This.
To learn more about Jesus.
To learn. So we are learning.
Fellowship.
Fellowship.
Encouragement.
Encouragement.
Enlightenment.
Grow in Christ.
Enlightenment. I don't mind that word. Grow in Christ.
And to glorify God.
You learn about
That's a good one. I didn't, and then I'm not glorify God. Together. Right? Together. One of the things I'm just struck with by this group, and like I said, and I keep saying it, but the sense of joy that I have in discovering truth. And I mean, and I get it when I'm studying it a little bit, but I really get it when it's validated by Dave, by Elizabeth, by Sue, by Christina. I mean, all of a sudden, it's one thing to discover some truths on your own, but when you have other like-minded people around you that validate those truths and that accentuate and bring out greater truths.
It's part of that
Joy.
thing that Jesus said, if any two of you
Yes.
agree on anything, it shall be done.
Yes.
So we're agreeing on things that are true. Say, yeah, that's right. And that builds our faith up.
It's funny because we had a visitor last week, and I love Ken, and he comes from slightly different tradition. If I say, when you say Quad Cities, basically what that was Prescott Christian, PCC, the Christian church itself. Where do they come from? So if you said Prescott Christian, what kind of tradition did they come from? Do you know? Who knows?
That's my idea.
Huh? Anybody
That's
know?
my idea.
No. If you see Christian church, now there are exceptions to this. This is not a universal thing, but if you see a Christian church, they come from the tradition of one of them was the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. Have you ever seen the Christian Church Disciples of Christ? It's got a little chalice on the thing. It's red. And then from there, it kind of mediates a little bit into these. They're not really organized as much, even as the Southern Baptists aren't really that organized. All intents and purposes, we're all our own entities, but there are their own entities. They don't have really an umbrella organization above them, other than some ministries. But I'll explain the Disciples of Christ, and they can explain a little bit of PCC. So, Disciples of Christ very much was. I was in one, and the easiest way of saying it is Catholic light in terms of how they treated ritual, communion, etc. So it was very ritualistic in terms of the order of service, in terms of the taking of and particularly surrounding communion. Now they didn't see communion as the literal bread and blood of Christ, so they didn't go that far with it. But it was very ritualistic by nature in terms of how the service went.
Liturgical.
It was liturgical, a little bit, not as much reciting as what can go on in kind of a Presbyterian church, but a little bit of that. And interestingly enough, that particular organization, the Disciples of Christ, got very liberal over the years. Like their theological seminaries became very liberal in their ideas, so that people would come out of their theological seminaries not believing that the Bible was the literal word of God. They would not believe in the actual creation event. They would think evolution had more to do with it than creation. So out of that organization, they became very liberal. So a lot of those organizations, as anything happened, Disciples of Christ was kind of the first one. And the Christian churches that you see all kind of split because why? Well, as one group kind of gets a little off the reservation, so to speak, those other groups split in. So he comes from the Christian church perspective, which is a little more ritualistic in terms of how they view communion, how they view, very much similar to, but it's just interesting to me to see his reaction to us and how we do things. I don't know, and I couldn't really get a finger on it, but when we do this, because all of this really is encompassed in this word of joy. There's a joy in here. Even if we're bearing our burdens of the problems that's going on, there's a joy in that as well as that. And I'm just learning to see that in here, and how. And then as we have this group, and then as Josh has his group, and then we do Sunday night things.
Most of us are in Josh's group.
I know.
Yeah. We were here this morning.
But my prayer,
Most of us.
and none of this, nothing happens. And I mean, things just don't happen overnight, and it's a growth. But hopefully, out of this stuff grows more understanding and more people that really learn this joy of getting together and doing this. I'm not saying there's not joy on Sunday morning, but a lot of that is robbed by coming, the event, it's Sunday, 10:30. I don't know how we rob the joy of that moment as much as we have. I think it's traditions and things, but why do I experience a greater joy?
You put it in a box.
You what?
You put it in a box, that stifles the joy.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think when you,
And that's categorization.
Yeah.
That's formed a body.
You know, when you're reading the book of Acts, you get the sense that it was a more spontaneous thing that happened frequently, where they,
Oh, yeah.
you know, they get into each other's homes, and they come together and they talk about the Lord, and it was spontaneous because that's what they wanted to do. Sunday
Right.
morning, sadly, people, I mean, you don't use the word obligation, but they feel like they need to be at church. And
It's what's said. I gotta go to church. I gotta get right with God. Gotta get right with Jesus. Okay?
And how do you look in church?
How do you look? And even yet, how do you look at others? I'm just struck. I'm just struck by what we do here and the joy that I experience coming out of here. That I put a lot of, you guys are amazing.
Well, in a small group like this, we can each know each other a little bit better than we can in a group of 120 people sitting in a
Very
room.
true.
Right.
You know, where it's easy to hide in your pew there, or in ours it's chairs, we don't have pews, but you know, just not say anything and not rock the boat or anything, but you're just there.
Yeah.
But in a small group, you know, we get to know each other.
Yeah.
We get to love each other.
we host a group for Heights Church on,
Yeah.
on Wednesday nights, and we've had a number of people who said they're leaving the church, but they want to still be in the small group.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's something about, I mean, more real,
Yeah. It really is.
together in a group and knowing each other and caring about each other, and you lose that when it gets to be a big group and you just shoulder to shoulder.
How
And
do you love somebody you don't know?
Exactly.
Or better yet, can't talk to at a better level than how's the weather and how's your job? How are the kids? And it's just, I fight in my brain all the time with the idea of how we do church. I had to come to the realization that if we ran a church the way I felt we should, I'd have about 10 people associated with me about this right here. Because, it would be, let's face it, let's all bring breakfast together, eat breakfast at 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, hang out, maybe pray for about half an hour. Someone get up and teach and just do this and be, like you said, a little more spontaneous and less structured about what you do.
But even just nailing a time and a
I know.
day for
Yeah.
consistency, it becomes.
It just becomes something else. Well, humans do. What do we do? Humans do it to religion, right? We humans do this to religion throughout history. I mean, Jesus came and changed everything. Everything changed.
And
Like-
no one in the old leadership liked it.
No one liked it. And then Acts came about, and man, did it change. And like you said, it seemed like these were these home churches, and they were meeting together. And Paul would speak until 6 o'clock in the morning, and people would fall dead into the floor because he was boring them to death. I mean, this is the kind of things that they did. I mean, we would go, "Wait, you were listening to Paul," but to them it was just will, right? Paul was to us will, or somebody up there just talking, or Josh, or me, or anybody just talking. We would still look back and go, "Oh, that was Paul. He had to be listening," but they just saw him as Paul, and he was just a guy that talked a lot. And they're like listening to him, and he taught them obviously things, but I don't know. It's just my prayer out of this is that this joy just continues to spread, and it's not a fast spread. This is not something that just everybody grasps a hold of. But I tried to share that joy last week with Ken. I hope he saw it. I tried to do that with Mike Stone, the guy that ended up, was my friend I brought. Because I told him, Alex, I said, "You want to see some of my joy in life? I'm going to show you at least a little bit of it." So, anyway, on my mind. You know me. I get something on my mind and I have to get it out. So there we go. We're walking through, basically, at this point, Jesus in Galilee. And we're in this section of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I said Luke and then Mark. Telling these stories the interesting part about this section is all three speak on almost on the same stories almost universally through this section, right? There has been a couple times where only two have spoke on the topic, but for the most part, we're in a place where all three are telling the same stories, slightly different orders because you can get them in different places and where the stories happen. So the Gospels were not necessarily chronological. They weren't made to be a diary of events. They were made to be, here are the important things that happened and Jesus said and did. And the order of them were different in their minds about how they were writing, why they were writing. So I think Matthew was much more topical. He really wanted to get topics in place and tell the stories in topics. Luke had more of this all-encompassing view. He was trying to just encompass it all. So he's telling this story from a grander perspective. I think he had some timeline involved, but not as much as what our modern mind would think. And then Mark, he had this quick-hitting, we're just going to get this on paper so the Romans can read it type event. So he's kind of hitting all these. They think he was maybe the first to write, so these had the beneficiaries of what Mark had kind of laid out there. Mark laid out the Princess Bride version. All right, that's it. No, not Princess Bride. Spaceballs. All right, that's it. We're doing the short version. Do you? Yes, you're married. Get out of here. Right? Right, that's the Spaceballs version if you've seen Mel Brooks' Spaceballs. Anyway, you know me in movies. That's what I was happening. So we're here. I have a problem sometimes, I think in my head, overemphasizing the moment. Meaning sometimes the moment and what I'm going through in the moment seems like the most important thing to me at the time. And then the next moment seems like this section of scripture, though, seems pretty important in the scope of how Jesus told people about his ministry, right? So what was about the kingdom of God? What did people see about the kingdom of God? When they said the kingdom of God, and people were, oh my gosh, what do we have about the kingdom of God? Why were they all happy about the kingdom of God?
Hope.
They were given hope with it.
Yeah, Beatitudes.
The Beatitudes.
People who were the outcasts were part of it.
The outcasts were now brought into it, and not only brought into it, but said you were the most important, not the least important, right? What else? Kingdom of God.
The king.
Huh?
The king.
I really say they were the regular folk, the normal person, not the religious elite, were led to believe they were lesser beings. They were a bottom of the totem pole in terms of what God felt about people. These Pharisees, the people, they were the ones that had it all, and they had nothing, and God really had nothing for them. And Jesus came and put that on his head, and he said, "No."
Well, it's interesting. He said, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, you will not see the kingdom of God.
Boy, he put them in their place, and boy, that was good news to the regular people that were out there.
Unless your righteousness exceeds that of them,
Exceeds.
well, then what makes the people happy about that? They have to be better than the Pharisees and Sadducees.
And the Pharisees were almost perfect at
right.
following the law, at least on the outside.
I want to say a theme. Somebody see if they can look up where Jesus says, "Come to me, you who are weary and heavy laden."
Matthew chapter 8, verse 32.
Matthew 8:32. Somebody read it for me. I want to put this as a theme of today, and really of this section, because there's something going on here that's in my head, and I'm trying to get it out.
I have it.
Go ahead.
And he said to them, go. So when they had come out, they went into the...
Okay,
That's
well,
probably
Wrong.
not it.
Yeah, I don't think that's 8:32.
Okay, that's fine. That's okay. I didn't prepare this. It just it hit my head as I was coming in. I wanted to do this. So, come to me, all you who are. You've got. Can you search it, Steve? Can you search it?
Yeah.
Just weary and heavy laden, probably, or
Unless the pigs were weary.
pigs. Hey, pigs are weary. Pigs get weary.
11:28.
11:28. Okay. What does it say?
Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
So rest was twice.
That's 28 and 29.
28,
30.
and 30. We'll just say 30. Okay. Rest. Jesus came. Well, I think this is part of the good news. This is part of the gospel. This is part of the kingdom of God. He came to give people rest. Okay? Did the Pharisees give people rest?
No.
Did the religious leaders give people rest? In fact, what did they do?
Put burdens on.
Put burdens on. And who placed those burdens on? God?
No.
Man,
Man.
Their own traditions.
And how would they do it? By what methods would they place these burdens on people? What was so bad? What would happen?
They would guilt them.
Guilt them. How would they do that?
Well, they're always complaining about the people being ignorant of the law.
Complaining about the people being ignorant of the law. So I'd say constantly lecturing, most likely. I mean, I think we're doing some conjecture here, but I'm good with conjecture. Constant lecturing, okay, about it.
If
What
they
I-
saw you doing anything contrary, they point it out.
Boy, they were bus tossing fools.
Yeah.
Okay, they love to throw you under the bus. I've got a few of that in my workplace. They're professional bus tossers. They will toss you under the bus the moment they can.
And the worst is they could kick you out of the community so that you were.
They had power to bus toss you, right? You wanted to be part of the religious community as best you could.
Well, it's not just religious.
Oh, that's good too.
It was life.
It was life, it was their whole social life.
Their whole social construct was built in this, right?
I mean, you got tossed out and you may as well just move to a different country.
Right,
Because there was nothing left for you there.
right. Because how did you have to live life? You had to live life in conjunction with everybody else around you. You couldn't provide for yourself all of your own personal needs. You had to have someone who could make some clothes and someone who could provide some other form of food other than what you grew, or any of the necessities that we go to the grocery store and buy. Someone had to help you provide those things, and you had to be a part of a group that did this together.
So it was the ultimate cancel culture.
Wow, that's good. It was the ultimate cancel culture. They lived it,
As I
and
said, what are you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites? You travel across sea and land, make a single proselyte. When it becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of hell as you.
yes, because not only that, not only did they place upon people this guilt burden. Look at you! Look how bad you are! Look at what you're doing! Look at what you're doing! They recruited others to do the same thing, and so if you can't beat them, join them, right? I mean, if you're trying to be at least somewhat in the society at this point, I think one of the other things that you had was, aside from the religious leaders, they had this throng of people underneath them that wanted to be accepted in this culture, right? They weren't necessarily the leaders, but they created all of this people underneath that if they saw you on Sabbath carrying a loaf of bread to your house, what would they do?
Turn you in.
They'd go tell somebody.
Yeah.
And why would they do that? What did that do for that person? If I'm not necessarily the Pharisee, but I'm this underling over here, and I see somebody doing something, and I go turn them into the greater authorities, what is that doing for me if I'm doing it?
Get you noticed.
Get you noticed.
Get them more points or something.
Get you more points. They'd see your stuff a lot less, right? Because at the end of the day, can anybody really do this?
People in that position like to use people like that to make them think they're good. They don't have to do the lousy stuff this person's doing.
No.
They have to turn them in. They say, "Oh, you found somebody. Yes, that's good."
I mean, so some of the examples of this. The woman caught in adultery. How'd you catch her in adultery? Because I don't think she was out there doing it in the public square.
Probably not.
Okay? That's not generally where that kind of stuff went. So, how did they know it? What did they do to know it? And how did they catch her in the very act? Right? But that's excused because you're dealing in the greater good for all these other So keep that in mind, and keep in mind, he came to give people rest. And what was that rest? So we got the calling of Levi. This kind of kicks off this section. So Levi is a
Jew.
and a tax collector. Is he liked or disliked? Very much not liked. He's in the outcasts, complete outcasts. Now, and you know, birds of a feather flock together. I'm sure there was a community of these outcasts, so that they lived their life and separately from everybody else, right? And they had at least some form of means because of the monies that they brought in, so they had means in which to live this life together. But they certainly were not accepted into the culture, into the society, into what they did. And so, I mean, would they have had burdens on their life as a tax collector in that society?
Well, just being a jerk.
Yeah.
Probably a lot of social burdens.
It's a lot of social burdens. Okay. So Jesus comes in and says, "Hey, Matthew, follow me." He's a tax collector. Yeah, come on. Oh, by the way, throw a party. And at that party, there's going to be
Tax collector.
other tax
And
collectors
sinners.
and sinners. All of a sudden, man, what's going on in these people's lives? Who's this guy? This guy's a rabbi of God? Accepting me? How cool. I mean, what's he doing? Where's he going? Okay.
Now, he was not a rabbi.
They call him teacher rabbi. He was not an official rabbi.
He was a rabbi, but he didn't go up through the ranks.
He was not the scholastic rabbi.
The rabbi that he learned under was his father.
Yeah. It's true. The ultimate rabbi.
Jumped all the ranks.
Right, that's right.
Yeah, he kind of jumped the ranks of the rabbis, I would say, at that point. Okay, after this, you get to the story is basically of the Pharisees saying, "Hey, you guys don't fast." What do we find out about fasts? What was the main point about fasts?
Make sure you do it twice a week
Okay, by whose law?
by the Pharisees' law.
The Pharisees' law. How many fasts did God actually ordain in the actual law? One.
Yeah.
Yom Kippur. Day of Atonement.
Day of Atonement.
The Day of Atonement. That was the only real fast. Now, did God say you don't fast? No.
You get extra credit if you do more.
Get extra credit. For them, that was extra credit, right? There were times of fasts. There's times to fast, but there was no laws to fast until their traditions caused them to fast. So they come saying, "Hey, why don't your Pharisees fast like we fast?" And was it just the Pharisees saying this at the time to them? Who else was it?
John the Baptist.
John's disciples, right? So John's disciples were being good Jews. That's what they were. They tried to hold to the letter of the law as best they could. I would hope that they had had a little better outcome of that. But at the same point, they were steeped in this system. This culture and system was very much a part of who they were, part of who John the Baptist was. Right? So Jesus says basically, what about, okay, why don't they fast?
Because the bridegroom was there.
Well, you're not going to fast when you're at a wedding. And we're at a wedding right now. I'm here. This is a party. You don't fast when you're at a party. Because that would make you a party pooper. Right?
Yeah.
At this point. So, they're talking about the fasting and already. So, Jesus has attacked now kind of their social statuses because he said he's now accepted sinners and tax collectors. Right? Now he's attacking one of their biggest things that they kind of lay on people, saying to be a really good Jew you must do these fasts. And I'd say in the fasting system, the fasts probably were less about going to heaven and more about just being a better Jew. Did you say that?
Yeah. Probably.
Fasts had nothing. I don't think that they would jump somebody for not fasting like they fast and say, "Hey, you're not a real. You're okay as long as you do these other things." And the other thing was the major one, which was what? What was their most major thing that you had to do in their system?
Keep all of the Sabbath.
The Sabbath. That was the most important thing in their life. The fasts had a place, but they also understood, hey, only the real deep religious guys are going to fast properly. Everybody else is going to live their life.
And that
So,
every Jew was a member of God's family.
yes.
You had to opt out.
But they would also kick you out, and were they more likely to kick you out because you didn't hold their fast or because you didn't uphold the Sabbath? Sabbath was really where it was coming. So right now, he's just attacking this idea of the traditions that they have of being a good Jew. Then he says, basically, by the way, these practices that you do, these are the old. I am the new. What do we do with can the old and the new coexist? No. This ain't gonna happen, guys. If I'm bringing something new here, this old is gone. They cannot mix. They cannot mingle. They have no place together. So finally, we get through the old and the new, and we get to where we're at, Matthew 12, 1 through 8. And I just want to, each of these, this is one of the interesting ones, because a lot of times we go through these passages, and they're very similar. In this case, there's similarity, but there are some vast differences kind of between the three. That's why I wrote them up here. So, Steve, read me Matthew 12, 1 through 8.
Where'd it go? 1 through 8?
Mm-hmm.
At the time Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, his disciples were hungry. They began to pluck heads of grain to eat. When the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." He said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry? Those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and ate the bread of the presence, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for priests. Or have you not read in the law how on the Sabbath, the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what this means, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath."
Okay, there's a lot there.
Then he says that the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath.
Lord of the Sabbath. Okay.
So what's above the Sabbath? The Lord of the Sabbath.
The Lord of the Sabbath. All right.
Yes.
So the opening salvo here is, at the time Jesus walked through the grains of fields, and his disciples became hungry and began picking heads of grain to eat. Why is that significant? Was there something talked about this earlier in the law?
Not really.
There was, well, actually, technically what they were doing was actually in Leviticus, and actually talked about the fact that if you were traveling and walked through a field, you had every right to pick grain. So that was there. This was something that actually was, people go, well, why are they picking the grain? Some people just don't understand that. No, this was actually a lawful thing to do. Now, what couldn't you do?
You weren't supposed to work.
You weren't supposed to, well, whether on the Sabbath or not, what were you not supposed to do in the fields?
So
So
you can't just harvest it.
you can't just go out and harvest. You can't take a sickle to it. But you can go out, you can grab some heads of grain, stuff off the ground, get them, winnow it out in your hand, and eat it.
Not to the poor or people.
Yeah, they were supposed to not cut to the corners.
Yeah,
They were
yeah.
supposed
Right.
to leave a little for.
Right. They were actually they weren't supposed to take everything out. They're actually supposed to leave some for the people that were doing it. So there's some actual, this is funny, there's some actual law here going on, right? This is actually dictated. God talked about this, about fields and about being able to go pick the grain. So there's actual law going on here, which is kind of interesting to me that this is happening. And all three of them do have this, hey, you got fields and grain. And this is talked about in all three. So these are very common to each of them. But the next section is where some of the stuff starts to deviate just a bit. Okay, so what do we got here? It talks about, haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? All right, what did David do?
Okay, when David was escaping from Saul.
Saul.
Okay, he was being
Saul's
chased-
not happy with him. Saul's the king.
And so he runs to, starts with an N, the town. Now, yes, which is where the tabernacle was at the time.
Which I've heard today, so I didn't, this is just because I was listening to it on the way here. Mile from Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Mile outside Jerusalem. This was before the temple. So the tabernacle, the temporary tabernacle was set up. The Ark of the Covenant would have been in there. They would have had the Holy of Holies set up, the place where they did the thing. And they would have had what continue.
Okay, so what happened is that he's on the run. He didn't carry much with him, and him and his men, there's only a few of them with him at the time, are hungry. So he goes to the temple, or the tabernacle, to the priest who's there, and says, hey, we're hungry. You have bread there, and we need it. We're starving. And after a little discussion, the high priest actually allows them to take the bread.
Yep. Interesting part of the story, too.
Well, he also takes the sword of Goliath.
Yes. And another thing he does here, which is interesting, he lies. There's actually a lie being told here to the
Well,
priest.
Well,
He is the king.
Yeah, it is, but he's not being completely forthright in this moment. This moment is not him at his. It's interesting because the priest, I think, even asks, "Hey, are you and your men clean?"
yeah. Have they had
Relations with women. So that's
Relations with
in their
women.
mind, that's what was clean at this
Yeah.
point. And he's like, "Nope, they're all good. Let's eat." Whether they were or not, I don't think really mattered at the moment. What mattered was the eating part. They needed food. And the showbread would have been much more significant than a little piece of bread like we would think. They actually were very large loaves,
Yeah.
12 of them, so they would have fed quite a few people. Most likely would have been the bread that had just come. And when did they do the showbread? When did they put new stuff on?
Once a week on the Sabbath.
On the Sabbath, once a week. So
Once a week on Sabbath, and next to that is a bowl and pitcher with the drink offering.
yeah.
Okay,
My
so
question
bread
is,
and wine.
did he do this on the Sabbath? I don't know that we know that, but it's possible.
But the point was, Leviticus said, this is holy, and it is only for the priests.
Yes.
And the priests were allowed to eat it. When it came to the end of the week and the new bread was there, they got the old bread, and the new bread was put on the table of presents.
Okay.
We're covering this on Sunday.
Preview of coming attractions.
Well, I'm not getting into this much detail.
No, there
I'm
we
just
go.
saying the bread of presents
Yes. Okay.
on the table.
And Jesus even brings up an even more poignant point. What about the Sabbath and the priests in the temple?
They violate the Sabbath
Every Sabbath. Why?
because they have to do the service.
They have to do the service. The priests violated every time there's a Sabbath. They're in complete violation of every law known to or better yet, every tradition brought about by the Pharisees. Just by the act of doing the very things that you have to build a fire. Building a fire, bad. Right? You have to kill something. Killing, bad. You have to move the showbread. Just the act of lifting the bread, bad.
Fix the altar of incense.
Fix the all of
Get
it.
it working. Make sure that the candelabra has oil in it. They would do all of that at that time.
So here they are complaining about somebody picking some grains on the Sabbath, and yet all of these other things can happen on the Sabbath. And then he drops a bomb, right? So you've got David's story here. I'll put that. I'll put, hey, temple priests. Here's our example here, right? But I tell you something greater than the temple is here. Huh? What is he saying here? What is he insinuating?
That he's God.
That he's God. I mean, is there anything greater than the temple to a Jew?
Well, the whole purpose of the temple was that's where the presence of God is.
Right. So the place where the presence of God is, and you're saying something even greater than that is here? Now, as we know, he is God. He is Emmanuel, which is God with us. Greater than the temple, guys. Absolutely 100% accurate. He is greater than the
Make
temple.
the temple great.
God's presence with us.
Yeah.
And now, not only is God's present with us, God's present with you individually here. Greater than the temple. The temple was just a shadow.
Yeah.
It was just a means. Better yet, Sabbath was just a what? What was Sabbath? Just a shadow of.
Rest in God.
Rest in God. Who brings rest?
Jesus.
Sabbath was just a shadow of Jesus. You are burdened and laden, I will give you rest. He is greater than the temple. And as we're going to find out here, if you had known what it means, I want mercy, not sacrifice. See, over sacrifice. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Not just greater, but Lord of it. Ruler. Lord. Okay, he's really getting into their skin now. Right? This is not the somewhat subtle little jab, hey, when he's getting right to the heart of the things that they are. By the way, your Sabbath and your ideas of the Sabbath are wrong. I'm great. I'm greater than what you've even done in the temple. And by the way, I'm Lord of this whole thing of the Sabbath.
And they were condemning the guiltless.
They were condemning who?
The guiltless.
Yes, they condemn the guiltless all the time.
Yeah.
The guiltless. And that lies the rub because
The guiltless we take that in terms of their traditions. All the people that didn't do their traditions were guilty,
we're guilty.
but they weren't. They were guiltless.
Yep. Which was the burden. That was part of the burden on them. That was the burden that Jesus came to lift. You're guilting the guiltless. These people had no reason to be guilty, and yet you put these burdens on top of them for no reason at all. Okay, so let's go to the next one. All right, Mark 2:23 through 28. Somebody else read it to me.
I got it.
Okay, go ahead.
One Sabbath he was going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. And the Pharisees were saying to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "Have you never read what David did and when he was in need and was hungry? He and those who were with him, how they entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar, the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which it is not lawful for any but priests to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him." And he said to them, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath."
Okay. So you get David's story, but you even get a more vivid version of David's story. So there's a little more in there. It adds the name of Abiathar and gets some of the, and then
More detail.
more detail, and then it adds probably one of my favorite lines of Scripture, period, which is
The Sabbath was made for man, not man
Sabbath
the
for man.
Sabbath.
Okay, what does that mean? So why is that? What Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath? What are we talking about here?
It was so that we could get rest, we could get peace.
It was for the benefit of the person that was supposed to be recognizing it.
Yep.
It was for their benefit. It was for their rest. Why was rest important? What was the most important? Why was rest important? What was God trying to say to the human being at this point?
Well, in Hebrews, the purpose of the rest is to rest in God.
Rest in God, yes, but there's even a more physical, practical purpose, which is what? Work all the time, and it'll end up killing you. I mean, you can't possibly. What God is saying is, you couldn't possibly. He's doing this for people. This is for their benefit, and the Pharisees have turned it into what?
A burden.
An even greater burden than what their work was. Most people would rather be working than going out and actually recognizing whatever was happening on the Sabbath day. Because it certainly wasn't anything that was fun for them or had any kind of actual rest for them. Because all you did all day long was worry about what everybody else was thinking or saying about you. About every little move you make. They said you couldn't even clean off your clothes in the morning. Do you know why? Because you might knock off an insect and kill it, and that would be working. Which is interesting, which brings me up to another point that I'm going to bring up later. But and then again, does mention Lord of the Sabbath. Love that the Sabbath was for man. That really does clarify something here. Brings about something that wasn't. Matthew was good. There was a lot said here, but this brought a little bit more of the idea that, hey, guys, God did these things for you. God is for you, not against you.
Sabbath is a blessing.
That was the blessing. God did this for you. And everything in their life had said God is really against you. In every way. Okay. Luke 6, 1 through 5. Who else wants to read it? Get that one.
You like that?
Go ahead, Dave.
One time Jesus was walking through some grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were picking the heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands, and eating them. So the Pharisees asked, "Why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath day?" Jesus answered them, "Haven't you read what David did when he and his companions became hungry? How was it that he went into the house of God, took the bread of presence, and ate it, which was not lawful for anyone but the priest to eat, and then gave some of it to his companions? Then he told them, 'The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath.'"
I'm going to do this because this was Mark's version, sorry. That was Luke's version. And next. More brief, right? This is a briefer version of the same story. What one thing did he bring up about the disciples and picking the grain that the other two didn't? What did they do with the grain? Rubbed it in their hands. Aside from the interesting part about that is, were there laws against that too on Sabbath?
Probably.
Do you know why?
Well, it's milling.
Huh?
It's milling the grain.
It's winnowing, actually. The term milling would be crushing the grain. Winnowing would be getting off the husks off of it and then doing. So it adds the fact that not only were they picking it, not only were they eating it, but they were also violating the Sabbath because they were winnowing. That's the term that they used, was winnowing. So it actually adds more of the condemnation of the Pharisees on top of them for doing it. Now, a couple interesting points. How did the Pharisees see them do this?
They were going looking all the time. They
They're
knew.
like the Gestapo.
Spies.
So, okay, how far were you supposed to be able to travel on the Sabbath? What was their rules? What was the one
It
of
was
those?
like 6 miles.
No,
That way,
not much.
Yeah.
It's like 1 mile or
Like half a mile or something like that.
It's interesting. I think if I know the story right, I know why it's this, but it's 3,000 feet. Okay, 3,000 feet. Do you know why 3,000 feet?
That's how far you were to a synagogue?
Tabernacle. This all goes back to actually the tabernacle in the wilderness when they set up camp. The furthest you were supposed to be able to walk on Sabbath was the distance from the furthest encampment in the encampment to get to the, because where was the tabernacle?
In the center.
In the center. And actually, I don't know how many of you know this, but the way it was sort of set up was somewhat interesting because it was, one of the things, the way that the Israelites set up camp frightened people. It frightened all of the other nations around them. You know why? Their organization. Their organization was so amazing in how they did it that it frightened them. And this is how they did it. So the tabernacle would be set in the center, right? Here's the tabernacle. And so if you're up on a hill and you're looking down on them, 2 of the tribes would be set up here in kind of a rectangle. I think 3 of the tribes to the left, 3 of the tribes to the right, so 3, 6, 2 is 8, and then 4 of the tribes would be set.
Actually, it's 3, 3, 3, and 3.
It's 3, 3, but the larger
But the
tribes were
largest
down.
one-
The largest one was down to the bottom of it.
Yeah, Judah, Issachar,
Yeah.
and Zebulun were
There
the
it
3
is.
biggest, and they all were at the bottom.
Okay? So if you look down from above,
It's a cheat sheet.
This was passed
Oh.
out. Don't you have your copy of it?
okay. Which, one of the things I love about being in here is the fact that if I don't want to ever be saying something that I'm just pulling out of my hat. I love verification, okay? And he verifies it. What does that look like? If you look down upon the tribes of Israel, they put the fear of God into people because of their organization. When they organize themselves, that's what they look like. But anyway, the distance would have been typically from the very base of, I think it was Judah. I can't remember who was at the bottom, but you have it right there, yeah.
Judah was closest, Issachar was in the middle, and Zebulun was at the bottom.
Yeah. So the distance from here to here was what they dictated was the distance that you could walk on Sabbath. Okay? 3,000 feet. So, my question is, did they go more than 3,000 feet to follow the disciples? I mean, how far is 3,000 feet? What's a mile? 5,280?
Yeah,
So it's not even a mile. It's about half a mile.
a little more.
A little more than half a mile. One second. Yes, sir.
It's not the only one who's skipping.
Pass it. If anybody wants to look at it, probably seen it. That's pretty much what that is.
I always thought that the tribes were side by side, the 3 tribes formed like a stripe. I never heard them stacked.
That's the way I was shown it. I don't know. I don't remember reading it exactly. how it
Gives them
said.
one new 2 use. Okay. Sorry, guys. Confusion at work. Anyway, so the Pharisees would have to. Let's just say this: they probably had to write themselves a few excuse notes for the behaviors in which they were going to discover whether or not the disciples were out picking grain or so forth and so on. Right? Now, another interesting thing that I wanted to point out about Sabbath and the Pharisees and some of the hypocrisies in them. If they had sheep, and one of those sheep got lost, or one of the sheep got hurt in their fields or around them, what would they do? Leave it?
No,
Why?
valuable.
Huh?
Valuable, it's one of God's creatures.
Valuable one of God's creatures. You couldn't dust off your clothes because you might kill an insect. Yet, outside of these events, what did Jesus do that really ticked him off?
Oh, he did healing.
Of who?
Lots of healing.
Of a human.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, which brings me to the point. What was more important to the Pharisee? A sheep or a human? Who had more value?
Sure made it look like the sheep.
Or the insect, or any other thing that they placed above the welfare of an individual.
Save the whales.
You know what? Okay, yes. That is, here we are talking about in a world in which basically there is a section of the population of people, and it's minority, fortunately, right now, that, for all intents and purposes, saying things are much more important than people. Which is kind of okay, so you want the world's population to be less so that what happens? So that the world continues and people. I don't know what they're trying to do. Do you really care about do you care about people, or do you just care about, I don't know what. I don't know what you're trying to say here, because if you're saying you care about people, so you want to care about people, so you want less people in the world, so those people can live longer. I don't know which one you're trying to satisfy at this point. But the entire movement is,
Well, it's satanic.
it is
What movement?
This is about save the whales, save,
Oh, yeah.
no.
environmental issues are more important than people. And so and it even goes so far as to say they want depopulation.
But abortion is okay. Save the whales, but abortion's okay.
Well, because why? Depopulation.
Yeah,
Because again, a whale is far more important than a human.
right, exactly.
Oh, they're bigger.
That's the way they,
Well,
That-
what about the little snail darter, or what it is in California, that they have to drain all the reservoirs so people, can't grow crops and you can't feed people, but the snail darters,
Are okay.
2-inch fish are going to survive.
Right.
So it's not the size.
Yeah, and
It's
it gets
the animals.
insidious because, has human, I want to say flourishing, but has the human condition gotten better in the last 200 years or worse?
Way better.
Way better, like by 99.5%. How we live, like starvation. How many people live in starvation now versus 50 years from now, or 50 years ago, much less 100 years ago or 200 years ago, right? 200 years ago, how much of the population probably lived at some brink of starvation?
Oh,
Probably more than half.
I
yeah.
would say 80% even at some level of the population of the earth lived at some level or right on the brink of starvation. Like one event would happen in their life and starvation was going to be on the cusp. Life expectancy was 55, 60 at best. I mean, that was you were living life well at that point. Not saying living longer is better, but just saying our human conditions. What improved our human conditions?
Science.
Huh?
Being able to produce food more easily.
How do we do that? What
Machines.
machines and what? How are those machines run?
Industrial Revolution.
How are those machines run?
Gas and oil,
Energy.
carbon.
Energy. We found ways to produce energy. Energy provided us this platform in which we provided the explosion of human goodness. I don't say goodness, that's not what I mean, but our human capacity to live greater than any one thing. And what are they trying to take away from us at every level? The one thing and because it's their philosophy. It's where they are. Yeah, sorry. Thanks, Dave. It's your fault.
So in the 1800s, 50% of children didn't make it past age 2.
Wow.
So if you exclude that, then your life expectancy was 55 years. But if you take into account the fact that 50% don't make it past 2, then your life expectancy is about 25 years.
Wow. That's an interesting point. That when you take out the kids under 2, so if you made it past the age of 2, your chances was you were going to live till you're 55, 60 years old at that point. But always on the brink of starvation. Always, like I said, you were one event away in your life from the needs not happening.
There was another statistic that I heard that over 100 years ago that most of the population, like 90% or something like that, spent all of their waking hours just trying to satisfy their needs for food and shelter.
Yes.
No spare time. All their time, everybody in the family was trying to provide for food and shelter.
And I ask you the question, was that a good or a bad thing? Yes. Right? Because what do we have now that they didn't have back then?
Twitter.
AKA, yes, AKA boredom.
Yes.
Boredom has produced more, I don't want to call it say evil because I'm giving it an essence of a thing, but it's produced more ill deed.
Well, the other thing is that we had to rely on each other more. So if
True.
you're out looking for food and trying to grow crops or whatever, spending all your time doing that, and we are, and you are, we're working together. If you
Yeah.
have a problem, we'll help you.
Yeah.
If you have a problem, all your neighbors will come and help you. Now,
You had a much greater sense of community. That's a fact.
now,
Grocery store.
yep.
And why grocery store? So that we have time to go home and play Candy Crush. Right? I mean, and again, is it good or bad? Yes. I mean, there's ill wills in all of it, but it certainly has grown. I think the word grown pride more than any one thing, right? Because when your whole life was about going and getting and gathering and producing and providing, that almost breeds a form. Even if you were a very prideful, had a very prideful nature, you had to suck up some of that pride just to live life. So you had to find a way. So I think people found their way to God. Well, what do they say? There's no atheists, farmers. There's no atheist as a farmer. Or what was it that?
Foxhole.
Huh? The atheist Foxhole, no, but it's what's his face? Oh, Paul Harvey. God made a farmer, and it's like a poem. God made a farmer. Basically, one of the premises is farmers aren't atheists. Why?
They have to rely on God.
They have to rely on something bigger than themselves. They do all of this, but they know they don't cause any of it. I mean, and they know firsthand, like how limited their scope is in this function. To grow food is a reliance upon something greater than yourself. So there is that.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I'm just saying, go back to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Jesus said that you blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel.
Yeah.
Looking at little things, not realizing that big things are important.
Well, sorry, what you're going to say, then I have something.
Well, I was just going to say, I think part of the reason God has all these different types of history is so that when people stand up at the judgment, they say, well, the reason I didn't follow you was because of how hard you made my life, and he's going to be able to show a whole society where things were so much easier, and yet there was so much greater evil.
Boy,
And
do I believe that.
Even that in the millennium, Jesus will be visibly ruling on the earth, and there'll still be massive rebellion.
Correct.
And people will say, well, if Jesus had lived during my time, I would have lived differently. And he's going to be able to point to those people.
And you say, nope, you didn't do it there either.
Yeah, he's going to prove that no matter what the conditions were, man's heart was evil. And it didn't matter how good, how bad, how anything. Man's heart is
It's just desperately wicked.
Yeah.
And when we say desperate, it's desperately self-centered. It's desperately seeking after its own glorification instead of God's glorification. That's really when it all really breaks down to where it's going. One of the points I was going to bring out is this. We got into all this about not caring. Anytime you get religious practice, so you name it, I don't care whether it's Buddhism, Hinduism, whatnot. Doesn't seem like it always is at the expense of a human being, and of our self-worth and of human worth, almost at every level. Like Hinduism, the caste system. What are sacred in the caste system? What's sacred?
Cows.
Okay. And they won't even try and kill a flea, because that flea could be a reincarnated version of their ancestor, and that might be hurting one of their family members. But what happens in the streets of Calcutta all day long?
They abandoned the untouchables.
The untouchables are just left to fend in a gutter. If it's a kid, if it's a child, zero human value whatsoever. It just seems like every time we begin, and even that's an easy one, but let's face it, when we get into churches, we get into legalism. Legalism devalues what's really going on in a human life. putting together, making yourself all look good, making sure everything around you looks good, versus the life of that going and yelling at an abortion clinic at a woman who's completely distraught and doesn't know what to do in life because God hates people that kills kids, or God hates fill in the blank, and it's being said out there, right? Why do, when we get into any of these religious traditions that begins to bring about ritualistic do's and do not behaviors, do we always devalue human beings and what's going on in their lives? Because that always happens. And almost, I can't think of anything that values human life more than it does the traditions of what they build. What did Jesus do? What was the first thing Jesus valued when his disciples were coming around and saying, "Who's the greatest?" and all this stuff? What was his first response at that point? Do you remember?
The least of these.
The least of these, but who was the least of these at that moment? Children. His first one was,
Children and widows.
"Hey, you want to be? These children are more important than you. Bring them here. Don't send them away. Bring them here. This is who it is. And oh, by the way, those who you think are the greatest here, they're going to be the least, and those who you think are the least here are going to be the greatest." Jesus valued people, women, when they weren't valued, slaves when they had no value, children when they had almost less than no value. Could you imagine a girl child? Girls had no value, children had no value, women had no value. Well, how much that 7-year-old little girl? And and let's face it, today, how much value does in some places do those have as well? Mm-hmm. Go to our border. The sickest thing that happens to me in my mind is, okay, we talk about sex trafficking and so forth. Why is sex trafficking a thing?
Because people are evil.
Because people want it.
And
And people go do it.
Yes.
and it's happened in the United
If there weren't people that were doing it, you wouldn't have people doing it. If there weren't people paying to do it, then it wouldn't be happening. How sick is that? Evil. Devaluing. And at the end of the day, you mash it all up. Who's really devaluing us more than anybody? Who's the one that's being the accuser?
Someone like
Ourselves.
Huh?
Ourselves.
Satan. Who's the father of all of this? Father of religion. I'd even step into the level of saying he's the father of religion. What do they really think? Do you remember? What do they think the basis of religion was, Rick?
The basis
of religion. Like, where does religious practice really go back to in humanity? What one event? Do you know?
the Tower of Babel, I guess. Yeah, when they
Babel, Nimrod. They actually point to Nimrod being the one that kind of created the gods that we know, the Roman gods, the Greek gods, the Chinese gods, the Hindu gods, etc. They all are very similar because they all came. It feels like, I don't want this. You can't. It's just conjecture, right?
They changed their names, but they're very
They change their names, but they're very similar in how they deal with humanity and how humanity is seen from those gods' perspective. That it goes back to the Tower of Babel and Nimrod, and that was the religion that he kind of created at the time. But all of it just does nothing but devalue humans. And Pharisees had devalued human beings. Jesus, I think that's why Jesus was so harsh on them, was because they looked at the crippled person at the pool of Bethesda, watched him get healed, and were upset that it was done on the Sabbath.
And that's why
kidding
under
me?
Matthew there it says that he valued mercy.
I value
Sacrifice.
mercy over ritual, sacrifice, all of this religious practice that you guys have come across. I value it more than that. And it's just, the hard part for me is watching even all of the good intended methods by which we go about practicing our faith. Right? They're good intentions. I mean, everything that we do had good intentions. The Catholic, we bash the Catholics a lot, right? it's kind of, we're good at it. We're good at bashing Catholics. But the reality is the Catholic system was created out of necessity, right? What necessitated why? The system of the Catholic Church was necessitated by what? What did they not have in 100 AD, 200 AD, 300 AD?
They didn't have the way of communicating, printing books.
They didn't print books. They had scrolls and manuscripts, but they didn't have anything put together that was called the Bible. They had no definitive source. So what was the source of truth to those people?
Started to be the apostles.
The apostles.
And then the apostles' disciples.
The apostles' disciples, and then
So you end up with bishops and priests.
so you end up with bishops and priests and people who were associated. Those were the holders and arbiters of what was true or not true, because people were going around saying untruths all the time. And so out of that was a good thing. That was Polycarp and Justin Martyr and all these and these names, Clement of Rome, and these names that we kind of hear throughout history. These were good things, and that was very much the Catholic Church that we know it, going all the way back.
Well, it was the church. I
It's the
mean,
church. That's all we had.
It wasn't the Catholic Church, it was the church. And there was one in Rome, and there was one in Constantinople,
And then what did we do with it?
yeah.
and we do it throughout history.
Turned it into rules and laws.
Turned it into rules and laws. And almost at every step along the way, what gets lost? Love. Love's lost. Love of people, value of people, love of what goes on in their life, love of what their reality is.
And corruption.
Then it goes to corruption, and that's even more insidious, because it's people who technically should know better. Not only do they begin devaluing people's lives, but then they begin to build a life on top of that, which is even worse. You devalue them, you put them down, you push them to the side, and then, oh, by the way, we're going to build a system that benefits me in that even greater. So who's worse? Who's worse, the tax collector or the Pharisee?
Have you been following what's going on in the Catholic Church right now?
A little,
With
not as
Francis.
much.
There is a big push with the joke, is the Pope Catholic?
Sure.
Seriously, some of the things he's saying are so outside of the Catholic doctrine.
Who is the Pope currently? I don't even remember.
Francis.
It's Francis. Benedict was the only pope that actually resigned his commission. Like every other pope basically died, and that resigned their commission.
Well,
Benedict actually
not
quit.
in like 300, 400 years, something like that. It
Right.
had happened before, but
Right.
many years ago.
Right.
Benedict resigned. The story goes that he was forced out.
That is the story.
Okay, the story is that he was forced out. The new one that took over came from South America, and I forget what his real name. It's kind of a Spanish name. But he is
a bouncer too, wasn't he?
He's what?
He was a bouncer at one time.
May have been.
I wouldn't be surprised. But he is a liberation theologist, Marxist kind of. He puts more stock in global warming, fixing global warming, than feeding people.
Correct.
Or promoting the Catholic religion, which is a form of Christian religion. But there's a lot of things that he's doing that everybody is up in arms about. In particular, they have a thing called the Synod, okay, which started because after Vatican II and all that, which was in the 60s, how do we relate more to the people?
Right.
Okay. Well, they started this thing where they wanted to start hearing from the people, and the synods are the people in the diocese getting together and talking about what the Catholic Church ought to be like. That feeds up to the bishops, to the cardinals, and to the Pope,
Right.
and the Pope looks at it and goes, throw it away, because this doesn't match the religion, because
Right.
the Pope and the magisterium determine what doctrine is. Well, he's pushing for the synods to be binding on, that is, allowing the people to make it binding on the bishops, and then the bishops, forcing what the doctrine will be. The big one right now is in Germany. There's a whole bunch of bishops and people who want LGBT
Yep.
in the church.
Yeah.
In the church
Wow.
to
Yeah.
legalize it, to
Yeah.
make
Basically, it's okay.
basically because in the seminaries and stuff,
Where this goes, guys.
so many of the priests have become LGBT, and it's been self-selecting that they are starting to dominate
Sure.
in that. This is what got Benedict kicked out. Okay, because he was opposing it, because he was a conservative.
Last
He was the last one. Because he was opposed to that, and every time he tried to do something,
would
they
fight
stopped
against
him.
it.
So now they brought in Francis,
Who's very much aligned with it.
who is more aligned with them and thinks that if he can get this synod thing to go through, then the people can decide what the doctrine is.
That's scary.
Okay,
I yes and no. I mean, all along the lines, are they Christian doctrine? Are they really producing Christian doctrine in the first place? Well, no, they haven't been
That's
anyway.
why I left, was because they teach a gospel of works.
Complete works, 100%. Even worse than almost the Pharisees at some level.
I mean, it's completely dependent on you. You have to, after you die, go to purgatory to make up for your deficiencies.
Right.
But what-
And who are you dependent upon at that point to make up for some of those deficiencies?
Well, those who are your descendants who are praying for you.
Yes,
So-
because you're dead, and their payment is going to do something for you to be saved.
yeah, I'm not trying to justify their doctrine like that. I'm sitting here for a reason also.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I see in all of this is what's going on in that church is also happening in our churches.
Yes, very much.
The exact same thing.
Sure is.
How many churches on that split you were talking about, all these splits, how many of that is because of LGBT and the destruction of the
Right
family?
now, the most
Most
of it now.
So it's the same thing that's infecting, Satan is infecting
Everything.
all forms of Christianity
Sure
in
is.
this way.
Sure is.
And it's happening everywhere,
All in the name of tolerance.
all in the name of tolerance. And pretty soon it's not tolerance anymore, it's you have to fall in line with it. You have to agree to it, and if you don't agree to it, you can't buy or sell anymore.
Nope. Are we surprised?
No. This is the way Satan works.
This is it.
The good news is God's in control.
God's in control.
He's going to hand it over to them for a while and say, it's all going to fall apart because I'm going to let you do it.
All of this, when we get, as we're breaking this section down, Jesus is just hammering at their religion and hammering at the value of the person. Mercy, not sacrifice. Healing over ritual. And really, at the end of the day, rest over burden. So, I'm going to end. That's a pretty good place to, because if I start something else, I got 10 minutes. Sorry, it was just, my mind is going some interesting places with some of this stuff, but it's just, how many things do we do because of religion versus how many things do we do because of really the heart of the matter and the heart of helping people? It's easy to, we live in a world that's easy to criticize, gang up. Even with good intentions, sometimes it comes off and we hurt people.
Well, the whole answer to it is it requires a change of heart.
It requires a change over.
And that only comes through Jesus. And an example of that is this value system that you're talking about that Christians are supposed to have, that's upside down from the world. Actually, communism wants that.
Right.
They're looking for the same thing. Okay, there's only one problem with communism is people. Okay.
The problem with Scotland is it's full of Scots.
You know, there's no change of heart.
There's no change.
It's top down. It's like a religion. You will follow the religion.
But I was even beyond the change of heart, a literal change of heart, not
Mhm.
just I change my mind. But literal implantation of our being, the heart which God gives us as new.
Yeah.
And it seems-
on
It
His words and
and it sees God above ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, and I, you know, that's the other side I think I get out of all of this is when I walk out of here, God is great. And then as the week goes by, I won't say God gets less great, but I'm a human, and my humanity takes over. And we have what? So part of us being here is doing it consistently.
Encouragement.
Encouragement.
Right there, we encourage each other. So this is kind of halfway through the week, you know. So
It is.
This is an encouraging thing.
It was good. I was really happy this morning. I was really looking forward. Like I said, the last hour put a damper in it. Just, you know, your day. But thank you guys. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this.
of course.
It's fun. It ends up being joy. And I don't think I've ever walked out of here without it at some level. So that says a lot about you guys and what, how you, the attitudes that you bring here are amazing. Thank you very much. So, I think I'll just be, yes, very much.
I think I'll just be
I
happy.
think I'll just be happy. All right, I'll pray. Or actually, Dennis, pray for us. You got it, brother.
You know, we do have joy when we come here, and we want it to continue to, not just for the rest of the week, but for the rest of our lives. And we want our eyes to be open to what it is that you want us to know and see, and continue to come back to you every single day. And we just thank you for all these people that are here, and we just give this whole evening to you in Jesus' name.
Amen. A life without boredom, how would we live?
I tell you what, heaven is not going to be boring.
No.
It
Well,
is
that's the
not gonna be
thing.
boring.
How do you, but this is what I don't think. We can't imagine a life without trying to appease our boredom. Does that make sense? We can't even imagine it. I mean, that is what we do almost.
You think we want boredom?
No, we're trying to appease boredom all the time in our lives, and it dominates.
Or you think we're all bored then?
Yes. In other words, how many things do we do
We try to overcome.
to overcome boredom? What is that big box above my head in people's homes? What does it do?
Entertainment.
Entertainment. What is entertainment? I mean, I'm not saying entertainment's necessarily bad, but what does entertainment do?
It's an opiate.
It's an escape.
Entertainment is a fix for boredom, right? And we all do it. It's the levels at which we do it too that can be dangerous, but we all do it. Now, when we're all said and done, imagine a life not dictated by boredom. That's the joy that we're going to experience when we're with God. Because we're not going to be bored. There's no such thing as boredom. Boredom is a human sin condition. That's not going to happen when you're with God.
Be busy loving God and loving others. And you will have joy and you won't be bored.
I'll say it, whether it means something or not, I don't know, but I think if you take that moment that I feel when I walk out of here, right as I'm leaving, as that joy that the brief moment of joy I'm feeling, but expand that to eternity,
Times a million.
maybe we might get an idea of what it is at that point. Maybe. I don't know. Anyway. My mind's in a wild place.
Tables and chairs.
Oh, yes, I got it in tables and chairs. Thanks, Rick.
All right, let's forget it. Let's leave them up, and I don't care if she gets mad at you. Not gonna get